Preparing the female jack, which you're going to need to know for making battery interrupters and adapting toys. Remember, if you like what you see, hit the subscribe button down below and check out my website at playenabled.com for more information on switch adapting. What you need. You are going to need a female jack. I'm using the one with the case on the outside that actually came with heat shrink tube. You're also going to need the heat shrink tube and a way to shrink it down. In this video, I'm using 2 separate wires, so you're going to need 2 separate wires. I'm doing 2 different colors, but you can do the same. Helping hands, your soldering iron with a way to clean it, and finally your wire strippers. I'm going to start by cutting and stripping the wires. In determining how long to make the wires, it's going to depend on what I'm using it for. There's no set length, so if I'm using it for a battery interrupter, it might be longer than if I'm using it for a toy. However, I do like to start with cutting it longer than I think I'm going to need. That way it's more versatile, and also if I make a mistake, I don't have to scrap the entire piece of wire. Rather, I can just cut down the mistake and use the rest of the wire. So I use my wire strippers to cut the wire. Once I cut both of them, I'm going to take my wire strippers and strip the wire. I know that they're 22, so I am going to put it in the 22 mark on the wire strippers. Then I'm going to give a straight pull out. I want a little more, so I'm going to do it again, but be careful with this. I explain a little bit more in another video, but basically you can accidentally sever some of the strands or all of the strands trying to do this. So as you can see, it's stranded. There's a bunch of small wires inside. So now I'm going to strip one end of my red wire. Again, I put it in 22, clamp down, and a straight pull out. You might need a little bit of force, but don't worry. Now I grab my jack and let's look inside. So you'll notice that there are 3 pins, 1 tall one and 2 small ones. I only need 1 small one. So I am going to cut down one of the small pins. This is optional. You don't really need to do this, especially if you're adding heat shrink tube. Now I'm going to attach one of the wires to the jack. I'm going to start by twisting the strands. Twisting it together is going to make it easier to feed it or thread it through the hole on the jack. So I'm going to start with the tall pin. There's my hole. So I feed the wire through, but I don't do it all the way. I leave some of the exposed wire on both sides. Then I bend the wire back on itself so the exposed wire is parallel with the casing on the other side. Then twist it together. It's pretty sturdy, you can see when I pull it, but we still want to solder it. I grab my helping hands and I put the jack in the helping hands. Make sure you get it in there good. You don't want it to fly off. The reason I'm putting it in there is I don't want to touch the jack while I'm soldering. So now I'm going to solder the jack into place. So once a little solder is on, I'm going to remove the solder and use that hand to hold that wire straight. And the reason I'm doing this is so that the case will go on nicely. If it's bent, it's not going to go on nicely. So there we go. So now I'm pulling it straight, but I'm leaving the soldering iron on the solder to heat up. So now I take my heat shrink tube. I'm going to cut it down to size. I use tin snips, but you can cut it with scissors. Then I put it on and I pull it up so that it's over the exposed wire I just soldered. Then I'm going to use my fire and shrink it down. So now I'm going to take my wire cutters and I'm going to fold the metal pieces on the tall pin. So I kind of put my wire strippers at an angle or a diagonal and then bend it as I'm moving the wire strippers. So I reposition them to get a better bend. Let's do the other side. I start at a diagonal and I bend it down, slowly adjusting my wire strippers until it's bent down all the way. So there we go, it's bent down. That jack is super secure, it's not going anywhere. Now it's time to attach the second wire. To do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by twisting the strands together. Then I'm going to feed or thread it through the hole on the small pin. Again, leaving a little exposed on both sides, then bend it back and then twist it together. Again, I don't want it bent like this, or even like that. When I'm soldering, I want to make sure it's as straight. So I put it into my helping hands. Be careful, again, it sometimes flies off. What I'm doing right now is I'm actually bending some of the strands from the red wire down so they were sticking out and touching the yellow pin. If that happens, the jack is not going to work. I need to make sure that no loose strands from the red wire are touching the yellow wire or the pin it's attached to. The heat shrink tube is definitely going to help, but you want to try to get as much pushed down as possible. Going to put the solder on, pull the wire straight, leaving the soldering iron there to heat up that solder as I hold the wire straight. It's sturdy, it's not going anywhere. Now add the heat shrink tube. Again, I put it on, pull it up, covering the exposed wire, making sure that it's covering all those loose strands so none are touching the pin. Then I'm going to shrink it down, shrink it a little bit more. So this jack actually came with 2 different size heat shrink tubes. I used a small one for the individual wires. Now I'm going to take the large one and I'm going to put it over the 2 and shrink it down. This gives it more of a professional look, especially if it's sticking out of the toy. So I use the fire, shrink it down. Now I'm going to put the cover on. I tried doing 2 at a time. I wasn't able to. So I'm going to do it 1 at a time. The reason it's hard to get both on is because the casing has this netting to it, so the wires get stuck when you try to do them at the same time. So then I pull up the cover and twist it into place, and your jack is ready to go. There is something I'll do now, or when I'm actually attaching it to the toy, and that is another piece of heat shrink tube on. I'm going to pull it up so that it's covering a little bit of the previous heat shrink tube. These are small pieces, but you can buy it on Amazon in larger pieces, but I find if I'm not having too much stick out, this works perfectly. Remember, if you like what you saw, hit the subscribe button down below to stay up to date. Also, check out my website at playenabled.com